And you're with Chat City Monday through Friday, your morning show on Preston FM 103.2. And a new review of legal highs could lead to sweeping changes to UK drug legislation, the Home Office has said. Legal highs, officially known as psychoactive substances, are synthetic drugs which can be bought online and sometimes in shops. The review follows concerns over drug laws that are not flexible enough to tackle them. Deaths from legal highs in England and Wales almost doubled to 52 last year, the government has said, and they are saying that they're determined to clamp down on the reckless trade. It is estimated that across the EU, one new substance a week is being detected. And to talk more about this, it's nice to welcome into the studio Simon Rothwell from Young Addiction. So Simon, a very good morning.
Morning.
I mean, for people who are listening, they possibly could get confused over a legal high to an illegal high. Mm-hmm. So what is the difference and what are legal highs?
Generally, legal highs, excuse me, are something that replicate the effects of a pre-existing, shall we say, established drug. So say something like cocaine or speed or ecstasy will have its kind of equivalent in the legal high world. Equally, that's kind of one half of the trade. The other half really is the cannabis substitutes or synthetic cannabises that we come across. But again, replicating the effects of existing popular drugs, but getting around it because they're not controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act.
Right. So if you were walking up the street and you're caught with an illegal drug on you, you could be charged, you could be cautioned or whatever.
Absolutely.
You could have one of these legal highs at the moment and really nothing can happen, or you can't be charged or cautioned.
Technically,
or whatever.
yeah, that's the case. However, in some cases, people often buy legal highs in good faith. There's many what's called research chemicals out there. There's many euphemisms for selling them online. I'll get to that in a minute. But you could buy something in good faith, but actually find what you've got is a combination of various chemicals, some of which could be stuff that is now banned.
Right. And you possibly wouldn't know that. I mean, wasn't it last year or the beginning of last year, 2013, where there was some kind of garden fertilizer that people were actually getting online?
That goes back actually about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Mephedrone. You might have heard of mephedrone. It's called bubble round these parts. With a very northern phrase. It's been christened as bubble. Mephedrone, not to be confused with methadone, which is what you get from a prescription if you're trying to quit heroin, but mephedrone itself is now a Class B drug alongside amphetamines or speed. When it came out, it was sold on the internet as plant food. In America, it's been sold as bath salts.
Wow.
And again, this is what I was saying before about euphemisms. Research chemicals is a preferred term at the moment. It's very vague. Kind of does what it says on the tin, but the research is you the person, you are the research. You're taking some stuff that you've never tried before, putting it in your body and seeing what happens.
Wow.
So in that sense, it's kind of accurate, but it's a very vague term. But plant food is what was sold mainly as mephedrone about 3 or 4 years ago before they banned it in 2010. And the reason they did that is because you can't advertise something as drugs for human consumption. Pretty much all legal highs will be sold not for human consumption, because we've got the Medicines Act in place. And the Medicines Act prevents you just selling anything for human consumption. If you say it's for human consumption, it immediately comes under the auspices of the Medicine Act, which means that it comes under very strict controls before anyone can touch it.
Right. And you work particularly with young people, don't you?
Yeah.
So what's the kind of, how do they find, is it word of mouth? I mean, are people kind of looking online and actually going by what they read online and then purchasing stuff? Or is it by peer group pressure and they find out about what's available?
A bit of both. Young people are quite good experimenters, shall we say. That's always been the way, hasn't it? Teenagers are very good at try now, think later. Again, they might have friends who tried it as well, so, you know, top tips. They'll give something a go. But it's not hard, all you have to do is Google Legal Highs. I did it on the way down on the train, and it's shocking how many websites are out there, how much product is available, but also how vague that is, how, you know, how that variety can affect people in so many ways. We've had a lot of people using these synthetic cannabises. There's thinking basically it's going to be similar to cannabis. I mean, it tries to replicate it, but essentially you've got a kind of dried herb soaked in a chemical that is meant to mimic the effects of cannabis and a solvent. So effectively smoking solvents. And that can affect people in all kinds of ways. People can have seizures, convulsions. We've had some deaths. Again, 50 odd in total from all legal highs last year, if that number's accurate. Isn't a lot, but to those 50 families, it's devastating.
Right, and that's it, isn't it? That is the side of this, that you're buying stuff that you just don't know what's in it, what the makeup is basically that you're taking, or what you're experimenting with. Yeah. And well, how's the way of dealing with this then, with particularly young people? Is it education again, as it so often is? Yeah,
we're pushing for that. Certainly up and down the county that we work in, we're pushing for a lot of education work, trying to challenge the young people that are existing in our services to be careful that messages they're spreading to their friends, and to make sure that young people are kind of questioning the sort of drugs that they're taking, basically. Yeah.
And is there an increase then of young people getting stuff offline and, you know, experimenting with stuff that really they don't know what it is, but they're hoping that they're just going to get this high from it?
A small increase. It's not an epidemic. When mephedrone became popular, say 4 years ago, we did have a spike in the amount of people using it, but to be fair, a lot of those were in their 20s and 30s. They were kind of people who were buying stuff online with their credit cards, debit cards, etc. And when it became illegal, they immediately stopped using it because they didn't want to be criminals. A lot of the young people that we knew were buying it from dealers anyway, because they didn't have the facility to go online and purchase with their credit cards, because they don't have them. But that was still a minority. A minority of young people take kind of harder drugs, end of, and a minority of those people are taking kind of legal highs. But we have had a little spike in the last few years. Enough for us to want to kind of be proactive about it and include it in our kind of education packages and the kind of one-to-one work that we do.
And do you think legislation would help then?
As in so much as legislation currently kind of works, for some people the penalties of illegal drug use are enough to put them off. Unfortunately for some, that's not an issue. Some people will always think, well, I won't get caught, or don't really think about the consequences. So a legal solution will work for some people, definitely.
And for parents who are listening, because this really is quite a difficult area, isn't it? Because particularly depending on the age of the parents and whether they themselves experimented with drugs when they were young or whatever, there's sometimes this fear of, well, how do I deal with it? Do I speak to my daughter, my son? Do I just let it go and hope for the best? What advice normally would you give to parents?
When parents ring us, and they do quite frequently, my number one rule is tell them not to panic.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, I know, but they invariably find something and think that's it, that, you know, their child's going to be a heroin addict within the week. Invariably that's not the case. And I would also encourage them, if they can, to have an honest discussion with them, not to go in shouting and screaming, because if you alienate your children, then it's really hard to speak to them. And if you want them to kind of get advice from an agency such as ours and come and get some any form of kind of ongoing treatment, I guess, then if you've kind of burned the bridges, that's harder to do, basically. I know parents who've gone to the police before they've even spoke to their children, and and the kids have left home, for example, so they've lost that kind of point of contact. So rather than solving a problem, they've actually compounded that problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you yourself working with young people, I mean, I'm sure there must be many young people who do want to talk about it, but sometimes the pressure of being part of a peer group, it must be sometimes so difficult to say, no, I'm not doing that, or I'm not taking that. Well, when you meet with young people, I mean, are they quite open about what they're actually taking?
Really?
Does anything surprise you?
Very little surprised me now. I've been doing this for, 7 or 8 years. I'm always astounded by how frank they are and how seemingly honest they are with us as a third party. I think sometimes it's easier to talk to someone objective than say a parent or a kind of sibling who've got a kind of vested interest in your future. I'm not saying we don't have a vested interest. We want people to move forward, but what we don't do is sit there in judgment like a parent might. You talk to a parent and it's difficult. It's a very different relationship to the one we have. So I find I've met someone within half an hour. I've heard their life story and all the drugs they've taken, and most of these are illegal. So they put a lot of trust in us. And it is very difficult when they're in social circles, like you just said, to move away from that. And it might not even be that the friends are going, go on, take this, do this. It's just that they're with a social group who are doing certain things and they just feel left out. They feel like they themselves are on the fringes, so they think, oh, sod it, I'm going to do that anyway. So we always look at the kind of social kind of makeup of their life, and see what other options they have. And sometimes it comes down to people have to find old friends or make new friends in order to move forward.
Right. Yeah. And most young people, do they experiment with stuff when they're out at weekends or out with the mates, or do they use it when they're alone also?
Mostly I would say young people do it in groups, but
which in a way is a safety net,
it's better, and we, the best message I give to young people is to look after each other, and that applies to all drugs, and that applies to all behaviours actually, drugs aside, just general risk-taking behaviour, peer pressure. If they're looking after each other genuinely, then that safety net is in place.
So during 2014, the main work is around education, I take it, with schools, because that's where the most of the work is done, is it?
We try and work very closely with schools. I mean, my particular patch is North Lancs, so Lancaster, Fylde and Wyre. But I know these guys who work in Preston, South Bibble, Chorley and West Lancs do a lot of work in schools, and we can hit hundreds at a time, and people will come to us, and even, in a 5-minute conversation, we'll have some very frank discussions.
So how many, or is this difficult to judge? I mean, there was a terribly sad report last week. Well, I say sad. I think we actually come to accept it these days from the Prince's Trust about the number of young people unemployed who've thought of taking their own life, who are depressed, who actually feel there's nothing to live for. Do people then turn to drugs, or is it mainly socially encounters?
Some do.
And nights
out?
It
is mainly socially, but some do. And those problems that you just described there, people being out of work or college or whatever, unfortunately compounded by drug use, because a lot of the stimulant drugs that people use work on the very simple principle that what goes up must come down, and people get very low having taken certain stimulant drugs, bubble being a prime example of that. And we've had a lot of people come through our service who have attempted suicide and self-harmed because they've been awake for 2 or 3 days, and they're getting desperate. They don't know what to do, and they just feel isolated and really low, and they probably do things that they wouldn't normally do. Unfortunately, it's things like suicide and self-harm seems to be amongst those actions.
And for anybody listening, any young person, any parent, then Simon, just tell us a little about AddAction and how people can contact.
We work across 7 districts in Lancashire. Early Break cover East Lancashire, but we do one-to-one work with young people. We call it treatment, but in terms of treatment as in, treatment with medication and stuff like that, that's very rare. It tends to be mainly for heroin users. And the amount of heroin users through our door is very, very low. Mostly it's about planning for the future, action planning, working in what we call psychosocial kind of ways. So it's kind of talking, therapy type stuff. But it's about talking to people, listening to them, letting them identify how they can move forward rather than us telling them what to do. It's about working with that person to find the answers together, I guess, and give them that support, and look at all areas of their life and how they impact on their drug use and vice versa. And then we also go into schools, colleges, care homes, etc., and deliver kind of group work with young people as well. But our Preston office, you can get older people on Preston 255 307.
And we're talking about drugs, but it's not always, is it, a natural progression that somebody who experiments at a young age then goes on to whatever stronger drugs are full blown?
No, absolutely not. It's a very kind of tabloidy response to that. If you ask every heroin user what first drug they tried, they might say cannabis. Therefore, the logic goes, everyone who tries cannabis is a heroin user. It's a false logic. The vast majority of people will experiment to some degree with whatever they're happy with, and that might be cigarettes, that might be cider, it might be cannabis, it might be speed, whatever. I think most people have a kind of a bar that they're not wanting to go over. We could argue that cigarettes are the gateway drug to everything.
Right, yeah. Well, yes, of course, you could, couldn't you?
It's a daft argument, but it's indicative of people's need to experiment and to fit in and look cool and all these many reasons that we have for drug use.
And I mean, the service nationally, I was just having a look before, has helped over 43,000 people try and beat their addiction over the last 12 months, support more than 600 families across the UK, and get the right advice to over 20,000 young people so they could make informed decisions about drugs and alcohol. And that's an interesting statement, isn't it? Because that's what you've got to do, because you can't threaten them, you can't.
Absolutely not. If we go in there and just give it the old, 1980s line of just say no, some people will respond to that, definitely.
Yes.
But a lot of people are going to go, whatever, and they're going to go out there and do their own thing. So, pre-arming them with the right facts and making sure that they're staying as safe as they can, I think, is actually the most responsible thing we can do.
And of course, again, it's saying to anybody who's listening that they need to think about that if they're buying stuff on the internet, they've just no idea what
Absolutely.
It is.
Yeah.
And what value on your own life then?
Indeed.
So again then, Simon, that contact number for Preston, if anybody wants to ring for advice or to talk to somebody, is
255 307. That's Preston.
Okay, well, I hope we'll be meeting up again quite soon.
Definitely.
And for further discussion, and that people, if they want any advice or to talk to somebody, that they make contact. Cheers.
Thank you.